Welcome into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. We've got a lot to dive into on this episode, including a camp intel. We got out in the field. We don't get to do it very often together, but Tyler Calvaruso made the trip here to Happy Valley. Daniel Gallen, myself, Mark, and Grace Brennan were all out at the Elite 11 All-22 event at State College High School on Sunday afternoon to give us our first opportunity to get a long look at Ethan Grunkemeyer, who had committed to Penn State as their 2024 quarterback pickup on Saturday. So a lot of quarterback conversation to get into. There's new 24/7 sports rankings, and there is a major riser that we had eyes on Sunday as well at the tight end position. Transfer developments, I should say, not issues, for both Penn State basketball and Penn State football. We'll get into those a little bit later, but right now, bringing on both Daniel Gallen and Tyler Calvaruso to this edition of the Lions 24/7 podcast. I've seen you both on this podcast quite a bit. I haven't seen you both together in some time, so glad we can make this work, guys.
Definitely. We got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, it was great seeing you guys.
A lot of ground to cover. Not too many sunburns to address between these three video boxes, which is good if you're watching us on YouTube. Okay, maybe you've got some going on, Tyler. But hey, well-earned sunburn because we got out there for several hours on a Sunday together. Not only was the quarterbacks out there, but there were some Penn State targets. Penn State commit Luke Reynolds working at the tight end position. And we got a long look at a lot of different things. But before we get to some of our takeaways from there, let's talk about the Ohio quarterback, same quarterback trainer as Drew Aller. We've got spoken about him quite a bit in Grunkemeyer the last maybe couple months, 6-7 weeks, it feels like, about him really evolving as a focal point on the 2024 recruiting target board. And kind of lay it out for us, Tyler. How did it come to fruition where he's committing on Saturday during a campus visit? And we'll get into his Elite 11 performance in a moment, what that meant for him. But how did this one reach a conclusion when it did?
I think really just came down to the fact that once Mike Yurcich got out to Ohio and saw him throw, he really became the top guy on Penn State's 2024 quarterback board. And it approached that recruitment as such. They went after him really hard, made it clear that he was the guy that they wanted in the class and that he was a priority. And, we talked about Clemson being a possible, maybe throwing a wrench into all of this and making it an interesting race. That offer never came. But honestly, I think even if it did, I think Penn State was going to be in the best position to close on Grunkemeyer as it did. I mean, visiting campus twice in as many weekends, really fell in love with what the town has to offer. He feels that Penn State has pretty much everything that he's been looking for out of his school in terms of football and what it has to offer off the field as well. So really just the timing-wise for Penn State, I feel like it's really ideal. Getting a quarterback on board at this point before official visit season was something that the staff wanted to accomplish. They locked it down. Now you go hunt for potentially another guy in the class.
This is a player, again, you're going back to some familiarity here with a similar quarterback coach, right in the mix of Buckeye country again. I mean, I know people point to that with Drew, but he was a couple hours removed from Columbus, Ohio. You're picking up a quarterback here, a riser who is from that Columbus area. And Daniel, you had a chance to speak with him on Sunday after the Elite 11 circuit. What did he kind of give you as far as why he was ready to pump the brakes? You see a rising recruitment. Sometimes you wonder if a kid's going to let it run. He decided to press pause and pick Penn State.
Yeah, I think that he felt a lot of comfort with the staff and with Mike Yurcich. He also spoke a lot about Danny O'Brien, the offensive analyst who goes way back with James Franklin, back to Franklin's days as the offensive coordinator at Maryland. And he said that developing those relationships, already kind of getting coached up by them, getting feedback. He felt that he had developed a really, really good relationship. He felt like that he had kind of identified, what he could do well for them, what he wanted to, accomplish and how this staff can help him get there. So from talking to him after the Elite 11, it sounded like everything had kind of come together. He was comfortable with the school, comfortable with the staff, and it just kind of felt like it was time for him.
6'2", 190 pounds, a guy that we can tell you just from seeing him firsthand, long frame, probably longer than that 6'2" would suggest, and plenty of room to fill out on that. The stats last season, about 2,700 yards through the air, 25 touchdowns, another 4 as a runner during his junior season. And Tyler, when we kind of look at the profile here as a prospect, what stands out to you? The comp at 24/7 Sports is Taylor Heineke. That's going to jump off the page. We're not talking about a Drew Aller kind of arm talent here. We're not talking about a 5-star quarterback, but I think it's fair to say He's going to get an opportunity to impress in a couple weeks out in Los Angeles. He made that Elite 11 finals, and then he's going to have his senior year, and there is going to be far more of a spotlight on this kid's evaluation process moving forward with the Penn State commitment, with that Elite 11 designation, that we're kind of in wait and see mode for how this ranking ends up. But tell me about the pedigree of the prospect that Penn State gets.
There were a couple of things that stood out to me when we saw him in person on Sunday. The first of which was his release. You see it on tape that it's pretty quick, and you see it in person that it's definitely quick. There's no doubt about that. Pretty effortless release. It really flick of the wrist, gets the ball downfield really well. That stood out to me. The other thing that really caught my eye was when he was asked to roll out of the pocket and make throws across his body. I mean, it was easy for him. All of his throws were accurate, and I understand that he's throwing on air, and there's not Ohio State and Michigan pass rusher chasing him down in a camp setting. But look, I mean, when you're making throws that effortlessly on the run, and in the instances where he was asked to throw across his body, and he's dropping throws where they needed to be, I think that speaks to the level of passer that he is at this point in his development. I think if he goes out to California and takes care of business at the Elite 11 finals, I think that you're looking at a potential 4-star quarterback for sure. I think he has that kind of ceiling, and that coupled with a strong senior season could really boost him up in the rankings. I mean, you talk to some people inside of Lash, and they like him more than they liked Michael Van Buren, and I don't think that's revisionist history at this point. I think that once Penn State got out to see him throw, they were kind of like, wow, this kid's really good. He's right up there with some of the best quarterbacks we've been recruiting this cycle long before him. And, getting to see him Sunday, I was really impressed with what I saw. To be completely honest, I think it surpassed the expectations that I had for him. I think this is a pretty intriguing prospect that Penn State has on its hands now that he's committed.
Grunkemeyer out of Olentangy High School in the Columbus area, 26th quarterback overall in 24/7 Sports current assessment. Again, he'll get that chance. He punched his ticket to join the Elite 11 finals fraternity, heading out to Redondo Beach, California. I've had a chance to make that trip 3 different occasions, and right in the heart of, right in the Los Angeles area, where there's always a ton of quarterback talent. You've always got some of the local flavor, but guys like Grunkemeyer making the long distance trip from Big Ten territory. And Daniel, when you spoke with Ethan about that opportunity, he's going to go shoulder to shoulder now with players who are considered the premier members of his recruiting class at this position. He'll get a chance to either show he belongs there or show that he's above his current ranking, or maybe he takes a step back in the eyes of some of our talent evaluators. But what was his take right after getting that invitation?
Yeah, he called it a dream come true. That this is something that he grew up watching on YouTube, and that I'm sure that all quarterbacks coming up are very well aware of the event, and its history and what it means for you to get that invite to be able to show out, and put yourself on the radar. He said that coming into the Elite 11 regional on Sunday, that his goal was he wanted to see how he stacked up against some of the best quarterbacks in the nation. You talk about what he's going to see when he goes out to Southern California to compete. He got a little bit of a preview of what it's going to be like with some of the guys that were there on Sunday. Dante Reno, the South Carolina commit, Ryan Puglisi, the Georgia commit, AJ Surace, the Rutgers commit. Those guys are all, especially Puglisi and Reno. Those are some of the top quarterbacks in the Northeast, in the region, guys that are headed to big time programs, and Grunkemeyer, stacked up very favorably to them. I think that each of those quarterbacks did something a little bit different very well, but I think that Grunkemeyer kind of showed his total package and what he's able to do. So I think it'll be exciting to see what he can do, in that type of environment. He said it was cool to have Drew Aller, who went there 2 years ago, to be there on Sunday at State College High School. They do a familiarity because of the their quarterback trainer, Brad Mendler. But yeah, I think Grunkemeyer is really ready. He's kind of a low key kid, so I'm very excited to see what it looks like when he's in that ultra competitive environment where everyone is an alpha, everyone's trying to be the guy. But it does seem like that he has a good mindset, for what he's going to be approaching.
Then he follows another low-key guy in Jackson Smolik, who we got to know last summer as he was kind of the Cinderella story of the Elite 11 circuit in 2022, ends up flipping from Tulane to Penn State. He was also at the Elite 11 camp on Sunday. Him and Drew Aller made the trip over, spoke to some campers, and that was pretty cool to see. And that's typically what you do see with the Elite 11. A lot of history there. And just looking in the context of Penn State, both those guys, as we mentioned, were part of that finalist crew, made the trip as they worked their way down to 20 quarterbacks across the country. And the 8th invite was Grunkemeyer. So they got a lot to fill out that roster, June 14th through the 16th in Redondo Beach. They'll get to 20 guys. But I will tell you this, Tyler, there's not too much time to do it, but you have some time to put in that travel request to CBS and say, I got to get out to Southern California. Last time I was out covering the Elite 11 from our Airbnb, I could hear the Pacific Ocean. So there's a lot of potential out there. But that was a while back. I'll date myself.
Trying to make us jealous.
There was a rising high school senior out at that event named Sean Clifford competing. So this was a while ago, Tyler, but just putting it out there, there's worse places to work than Redondo Beach, California. Grunkemeyer will get his opportunity. And in the past, we've seen some players light it up. Sean Clifford had a really nice run. He ended up being part of that final group of the Elite 11 in that 2017 class. Justin Fields was on an Elite 11 tear during his commitment. Of course, he ends up leaving the Penn State class along the way. But Christian Veillere was invited a few years ago. They kind of had a revised setting down in Nashville where they brought in guys during the pandemic. It wasn't quite the Elite 11 finals, but it was essentially that. So Penn State's had that representation in the past, and they hope they have another good quarterback here in Grunkemeyer coming on board. What else did we see from this quarterback group, guys? I mean, Daniel made a great point in telling us that and reinforcing that there were a couple 4-star, and that's 4-star composite, that's 4-star 24/7 sports, 4-star SEC quarterback commitments sharing the field with Grunkemeyer. He gets the invite. Those guys did not on Sunday. They may well get that invite before the action takes place in June. But who else stood out to you, Tyler, when we were kind of assessing the field of predominantly 2024 and 2025 quarterback recruits?
Ryan Puglisi, the Georgia commit, was one. And Brian Doan wrote it in his write-up, and I couldn't agree more that he threw a couple balls where you were like, wow, the ball really pops out of his hand. The arm strength, very apparent. I think he's definitely a candidate to receive an invitation to the Elite 11 finals moving forward. I think Georgia's going to be getting a good one down there. That quarterback class that they have is loaded. I mean, Dante Reno is Dante Reno, man. I've been complimenting him on here, for every time he comes up in some regard. I think he's a really good quarterback. I think that South Carolina is getting a solid one. The one that really stood out to me in terms of 2024's elsewhere was AJ Surace, the Rutgers commit. I mean, it was my first time seeing him in person. I tapped into his junior film a little bit after Rutgers got the commitment for him, really out of sheer curiosity. Penn State was never really all that involved there, but man, he's looking like a really good prospect for the Scarlet Knights down in Piscataway. So they got to love what they have in the quarterback room. 2025, we got to see Blake Hebert in person a day after he picked up his offer from Penn State. To me, he was the best 2025 quarterback there. That's just my opinion. I felt that frame-wise, he's already pretty advanced for a 2025 recruit. I mean, he's already 6'3", 205. Ty, you brought it up to me. It was looking like Bo Pribula out there frame-wise. So, I mean, I like that comparison. I think it was pretty on point. So he's advanced in that regard. I like the arm strength. I like the mechanics. He's got a really nice touch on his deep ball. And beyond him, Malik Washington, who actually made it to campus for a visit right after the Elite 11 regional ended. He had a really good day. I think that the upside with him is really, really high. I mean, he's a good athlete. He's a basketball player. He plays for Team Mello on the EYBL circuit. So we're talking about a guy who's really still kind of tapping into that quarterback skill set, right? He's been a high-level athlete throughout his high school career on the hardwood and out on the gridiron. I think you're starting to see him become a little bit more refined as a quarterback prospect, and I think he's got a 4-star ceiling on him. He's one the Penn State staff likes, high on the board. Remember, tested really, really well when he camped at Penn State last summer. That was something that caught the eye of Mike Yurchis and the staff. And, given the fact that he's not all that polished right now and Penn State was still willing to take that chance, I think that speaks to the hopes that they have for him. Cole Gear from Massachusetts, he was the Spark U high scorer on the day. He's a kid who, man, he's one of those ones. Every time I see him in a camp setting, he impresses me more and more. Saw him in Jersey in the rain in last month where he took home MVP honors, and he had another really good day in State College. So I think his stock is up, and I think that he is an offer candidate down the road, depending on how Penn State's 2025 quarterback recruiting plays out. Hebert has the offer, Gear doesn't yet, but I think that could change depending on how some of the chips fall. He's definitely on the radar. There's been frequent contact. Didn't make it to campus Saturday. That's going to be something that he looks to accomplish this summer. So there was a lot to like out of the quarterbacks who made it to town, man. There's a lot of talent on the field there. Henry Hasselbeck, the 2024 out of Massachusetts, son of NFL quarterback Matt Hasselbeck. He's in line to officially visit Boston College in Pittsburgh this summer. He was another intriguing guy. There was a lot. We could spend a whole podcast episode just talking about what we saw out of those quarterbacks. So it was a good day for the talent in the room.
You mentioned Cole Gear with that the highest spark score of the event. Just to reiterate what that is, it's the cumulative athletic scoring. People may remember, Will Levis, I think, had like the highest spark score out of any quarterback they tested in that 2018 recruiting class. That was a pretty big deal. And now Gear's the guy who caught some attention for that this past Sunday. And I'm with you, though, and you kind of dissecting some of those rising junior quarterbacks who are on the field. There were a few good ones, and guys who are going to end up with Big Ten offers. We'll see how many of them ultimately end up as legitimate Penn State targets. But I think Hebert's certainly in that legitimate category. I mean, when Mike Yurcich offers you after checking you out a little bit closer, that says a lot. And then we had the opportunity, and I thought Hebert certainly looked the part over the course of the day. You talked about Perbula and me mentioning just based on the eye test, there's some similarities in how they're kind of put together. And Hebert's probably already a little bit taller than Perbula, and he's only halfway through his high school career. So really curious to see where he goes from here. And both he and Gear out of the state of Massachusetts, which has been really good to Penn State lately. And a guy we're going to get into right now is one of the major risers, and Luke Reynolds, at Cheshire Academy up in Connecticut. And we talk about the New England preps and what they've meant to Penn State on the recruiting trail. Been pretty important cycle by cycle, and they've got a really good thing cooking right now with Luke Reynolds. When he committed, guys, we spent some time on the podcast, and I know Brian Doan wrote about it, but back in February when he commits, we got to couple games at tight end, mostly at quarterback, focus at quarterback. Let's see what he looks like in the fall. He didn't have to even get close to September to start validating some of this hype and start rising in the rankings. Daniel, he goes from outside of the top 24/7, a 3-star prospect, to inside the top 100 in the top 24/7 rankings update that dropped on Monday. He is number 80 overall. He's the number 6 tight end, standing 6'4.5", 215 pounds. We got a long look at him on Sunday, and I think we all came away thinking that he may have been the most impressive player on the field, regardless of position, with the tip of the cap to all those fine quarterbacks we just referenced.
Definitely. I think Luke Reynolds really looks the part when you're talking about a tight end who still has some development to do before he gets on campus, but he really seems to fit the mold of what Ty Howe, Mike Yurcich, James Franklin, what they're bringing to campus at the position, what they're looking for. I really I thought that he looked very athletic, very fluid in the way that he was moving. I think the one thing that I think you wrote about it a little bit, Tyler, in talking to Adam Brenneman, who was putting the former Penn State tight end who was at Elite 11 and putting Luke Reynolds through drills, is that they had him doing some offensive line stuff. He was, I think there was a long stretch of time where it was Luke Reynolds, Adam Brenneman, Tyler Merrill, the 2026 offeree from Cumberland Valley, who's a very big kid, and then a local a state college high tight end, where the three of them were just under Brenneman, doing blocking drills over and over and over again. And I thought that was, kind of cool to see in that camp setting, especially on a day that is so much about the quarterbacks. We got to see Luke Reynolds really working on those finer points, things that he's going to have to do when he gets to Penn State. But I think that, seeing him rise this early in the process, I think that it's really great for generating some excitement into what he can be in his senior year. I think the fact that he's relatively new to the position, he's not going to be doing quarterback anymore. I think that makes it even more exciting, because if he's at this point already, how much more can he develop? How is he going to really fine tune things? I think that he is he's poised to, I think, be one of the centerpieces of this class from a rankings perspective once everything wraps up later this year.
He's got the personality to match it. I mean, I really like what you pick up from this guy from a conversation. And speaking with Adam Brenneman after the camp, he knows what it's like to be a blue chip tight end. Many considered him the top tight end prospect in the country back in the 2023 recruiting class. He ends up at Penn State, goes on to become an All-American at UMass, would have been a big-time NFL draft prospect, has an injury, has to step away. and a few years ago emerges as one of the youngest position coaches you'll find across college football at Arizona State. So he's doing a lot of stuff in media now. You probably picked that up, but he was here in State College, back in town, and working very closely. So coming out of it, it was a chance to kind of pick his brain. He had not met Luke Reynolds before Sunday. They had not really had any interaction. So he was kind of coming to this with general base knowledge about the Penn State commitment, but not really a deep dive. And coming out of it, he said, reminds me a lot of Mike Gesicki. And he would know Mike Gesicki pretty well. He hosted Gesicki during his official visit in high school. Gesicki followed him into campus, and those two have remained so close, in fact, that he had Mike Gesicki on a FaceTime call with the young tight end prospect Reynolds on Sunday afternoon. So already building up that chemistry. And Brenneman is the highest rated tight ends recruit of the Penn State 24/7 sports era. So we're going back to 2010, I think that is. Brenneman was number 48 in the country in 2013. Gesicki was number 58 in the country in 2014. Theo Johnson was number 61 in the nation in 2020. And next up on that list is Luke Reynolds, when you talk about specifically Penn State tight end prospects in the 24/7 sports rankings. So he's number 80. Zach Kuntz was number 111. Andrew Rappelier is number 176. Guys like Khalil Dinkins, Jerry Cross, Brenton Strange, all 4-star prospects who weren't top 24/7 prospects. So I can go on and on and on, but if you're near the top of any list, when we're talking about tight ends here in the last decade and a half span at Penn State, and that's where he is, I mean, that's going to say a lot, Tyler Calvaruso.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at the jump that he took in the rankings, I thought it might be maybe his ceiling, at the end of the cycle, and to see him there already at this point in the cycle. And keep in mind, his boost in the rankings came even before he dominated in State College on Sunday. That was already something that
we knew this was coming. Yeah, that's wild.
This wasn't something that came about based on what was seen on Sunday. This was already in motion. So there's a lot of excitement around Reynolds' frame, his body. How just he can carry more weight and maintain such a high-end athletic profile. That's really what drove, I think, this boost in the rankings. I mean, he's tested really well. He's looked good pretty much in one-on-ones in every camp that he's taken part in. He was getting it done in Jersey in the rain. I got to watch a couple of reps that day from him, and I don't think he dropped the pass on a day where a lot of guys had issues catching the football, and rightfully so, given the conditions. And then what we see on Sunday, I mean, Tyler, you got a really great look at a lot of him and a lot of video of him during one-on-ones. I'm not sure he lost a rep. I think that he won pretty much every single rep that he had that day in one-on-one. So, I mean, it's a huge addition to the Penn State tight end room moving forward. And, they're still taking some big swings at the position. The likes of Caleb Odom is slated to make an official visit in June, but they're really, really excited inside of Lesh about what Reynolds is right now as a prospect and his upside moving forward and the work that they can really put in with him when he gets to campus. They're really excited about what they could accomplish with him. And that's 2 straight cycles where you have a guy like that. Andrew Rappelier was that guy in 2023. Luke Reynolds is that guy in 2024.
Yeah, Rappelier finished number 176 overall in the 2023 rankings. He just got to campus. He's one of 3 freshman tight ends in a position room that here in 2023 has 7 scholarship players. And this was an opportunity as well this past weekend for Reynolds to get back into team facilities. He spent some time with Rappelier, got to know him a little bit, spent some time with Ty Howell. He said each visit, it gets a little bit of a deeper dive into the details in terms of what to expect with that day one installation, what to expect from this Penn State playbook. And with Reynolds, he's just trying to figure out right now what to expect from a full-time focus at tight end. Again, history for him on the football field, his quarterback, really going through much of last season too. So it's a transition. He's in a good place right now. Cheshire Academy loaded with Power 5 talent, and a guy that you referenced in the Elite 11 breakdown, Dante Reno, who I've really liked for several years now. And he's a 4-star quarterback running that offense. So figures to be maybe not the end of this rise for Luke Reynolds. As you said, the Sunday camp performance that there were a lot of 24/7 sports eyes on, that one is going to carry forward, inform some opinions, and then we'll see what he does with his senior season. But by the way, he's heading out to Los Angeles too. One of the very few non-quarterback participants going to be out in Los Angeles for the Elite 11 finals. They have these all-22 supplemental camp going on with Elite 11 that involves linebackers and wide receivers and tight ends and cornerbacks and what have you. He will be part of a very small group heading to the West Coast in mid-June. So he'll get a chance to play some pitch and catch again with Grunkemeyer out there. What else are we missing from camp, what we saw on the field, fellas? I know there were some players that jumped out to us from those non-quarterback spots. And Daniel, I don't know if you want to take this, Tyler, but I know there's just a few guys that we got to get to before we turn our attention elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that. Sorry, Daniel. I'll let you get to it. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But Ezekiel Marcellin, the 2025 linebacker from Miami Central, he was the one that kind of stood out to me the most, just given what he was able to accomplish in coverage. And man, Tyler, me and you got to watch him during positional drills where he was going up against running backs. And I know it's
little cat and mouse situation.
Yeah, and I mean, he's being physical to the point where, I mean, he's laying hands on these ball carriers. It sounds like the way it popped, it sounds like they had pads on. That's how hard he was hitting in a non-contact, non-pad situational drill. So I think that he's another guy, high-end athletic profile, I think, really once camp season ends, as he goes through the summer, I think he's not going to be a composite 4-star anymore. I think he's going to be more than that. I think we're going to have him up to a 4-star in our ranking. So I was really impressed with him. Elijah Jones, the Philly receiver from St. Joseph's Prep, he was another guy who kind of stood out to me. I'm not sure if he's going to stick on the Power 5 level, but he does have a Kent State offer and official visit set up, I believe June 9th. I believe that's the date of that official visit. And I bring that up because we've seen Kent State produce some pretty good receivers. I mean, Dante Cephas transferring in from Kent State. So I think, if he goes there and he balls out and he does what he has to do, maybe this is a name that we're talking about down the road as a potential portal target. I'm not ruling that out. I think he's got that kind of talent in him. So those were two guys who really stood out to me.
Yeah, I think when you look at the defensive group, Jared Smith, he wasn't a participant throughout, but just watching him in some early drill work, he stood out among defenders. He's committed to Michigan, so we'll see him come back in a Wolverines uniform into Happy Valley somewhere down the line. But among uncommitted guys and looking at some of the younger players, to me, Maxwell Roy was the name that I took. And Daniel, I know you felt the same way. It was one of the first guys before the quarterbacks were throwing the ball. We saw this defensive tackle from Philly out there working. He's a St. Joe's Prep guy that has not been a pipeline of any kind for Penn State on the recruiting trail of late, but this is a guy that they're going to take their shot with. I know, Tyler, you spoke with him, but Daniel, if you want to weigh in on this one as well.
Yeah, I think from that lineman group, Jared Smith was the guy, just in terms of how well he was moving, what he was able to show. I really, really liked what I saw from him, but Maxwell Roy wasn't far behind. I liked the frame. I like what you can develop that into. I thought he moved really well. I think that's kind of in that environment, you're looking for some fluidity. You're looking for some, seeing which athletic traits pop a little bit. And I liked what I saw from Roy. I think that, in terms of just scanning that field, all the non-quarterbacks, where your eyes gravitate towards, it was to that group of defensive linemen, and Maxwell Roy, I think, stacked up very nicely with someone like Jared Smith, who is, going to play in the Big Ten.
Thanks for bringing him up. I completely forgot about the kid I talked to.
Yeah, I was like, you had a conversation with the young fella. Yeah.
He's a great kid, man.
Well, what stood out from a recruiting standpoint? I mean, obviously he's an impressive player, but when we talk about him and Penn State, I know a lot of people on our message board, I think one of the first comments on your story about Roy was, I'll believe it when I see it, considering where he goes to school. What's kind of your retort there in terms of general interest between Penn State for a kid who's in that 2025 cycle?
I mentioned it to you right after I talked to him. I thought that maybe he might be one of those Philly kids to really go to St. Joe's Prep and kind of break the mold and wind up in Happy Valley. I think he's got some legit early interest. I think that he likes Deion Barnes. It helps that Gabe Infante is here. And I say that, there are a lot of times where Philly kids who have played at St. Joe's, Infante on the staff, and it does help Penn State, but it doesn't get them a commitment in the end, or it just doesn't really get Penn State to the finish line. I think with Roy, it's different because Infante has actually played a pretty big part in the path that Roy is currently on. He was an offensive lineman when he camped at Penn State last summer. Infante pulled him to the side and said, "Hey, look, big fella, you might want to try out the D-line. I think you might have something there." He tried it, and Roy was even telling me, "Look where I am now," and a lot of that has to do with him. He's going to make a lot of visits. He told me he's going to use the first half of the summer to visit the regional schools involved in his recruitment. That includes another trip to Penn State. Back half of the summer is going to be dedicated to more of the national schools involved in his recruitment outside of the region. He's going to make some trips, do some traveling before getting back to Philly and getting ready to play a national schedule with St. Joe's Prep. So he's a South Jersey native. He's going to be back in town again sooner rather than later. So I think this is one we're going to have to keep an eye on. I understand the sentiment that Penn State hasn't landed a kid from St. Joe's in a little bit. And they're always looking for that one guy who might be able to break that streak. I think there's a legit chance with Roy. It's also important to know. I mean, it's early. He's in 2025, so we're going to have to see where his recruitment takes him in the end.
Early, but he is considered a top 200 prospect, a 4-star prospect on the defensive line, and certainly a name to know moving forward in the 2025 cycle. All right, moving away from the camp action. And actually, one thing before we do that, we got confirmation from Luke Reynolds' early enrollment. That's pretty important. We're going to start to hear that from these guys as they sort through their plans, and we'll find out who's coming in January. It was a huge group that came from that freshman class last time. We got some recent enrollees that we'll get to in just a moment, including a transfer for Penn State football. But getting back to those rankings that we referenced, it wasn't just Reynolds involved there. There is some serious representation for the Nittany Lions 2024 class, for the target board. And Tyler Calvaruso, can you kind of talk us through those new top 24/7 rankings that drop on Monday? And let me put the caveat out there. There will be updates beyond the top 24/7, but they will be separate. So if you're looking for a jump for a guy like Grunkemeyer, say right now, that wasn't what was addressed in this one, unless you're jumping all the way up into the top 24/7, which was the case for a guy like Luke Reynolds.
Yeah, Reynolds was the big winner of the rankings when it comes to Penn State commits and targets. On the commit front, a lot of guys actually wound up taking a tumble. Quentin Martin stood pretty much pat. I think he dropped one spot, and that's not really anything having to do with him. That's just kind of how the rankings go when you get a bunch of new guys inside the top 24/7. Donovan Harbor dropped a little bit. John Mitchell dropped a little bit. That one kind of surprised me. I'm higher on Mitchell than most. I think he's going to be a really good player at the next level. I like the length out of him as an outside cornerback. So I'm going to be interested to see where he finishes in the rankings when it's all said and done. Target-wise, though, there was a lot of important movement, I would say. Jameer Grimsley is the top 24/7 cornerback now. He's going to be at Penn State for an official visit on June 9th, and he is the top guy on Terry Smith's board at this point in the cycle. Elijah Newby is a top 24/7 linebacker now. He's going to be at Penn State for an official visit on June 9th. Another guy who's high on the board for Manny Diaz. Speaking of linebackers who are high on the board for Manny Diaz, Chris Cole. I mean, he didn't just jump into the top 24/7. He's a top 70 prospect in the nation. Actually, he's top 65. I think we have him at 63. I mean, he's a really athletic linebacker out of Salem in Virginia. He's going to be at Penn State. He's going to start the month at Penn State with an official visit during the first weekend. His recruitment, I got a question about this today. His recruitment's one of those ones that's kind of too close to really call right now, anoint the leader heading into official visit season. He got offers from Bama and Georgia. Those two really opened his eyes. But he does like Manny Diaz, and he's been made to feel like a priority pretty much from the start. And I think that pays off for Penn State here. I think it's probably a good thing that they're going to get the first crack at him in June. Sometimes it's more impactful to get that final official visit of June. But, that might change a little bit with the new official visit rules. If Cole's one of those guys who decides, I want to take this a little bit further, make more official visits moving forward, going beyond the 5 that they were previously allotted, maybe Penn State makes a really strong early impression, and that is something that he carries with him throughout the official visit process. I think that's definitely on the table. Another guy who made a pretty big jump, Nitro Tuggle, the receiver. He's a Georgia commit. He's slated to be on campus for an official visit early in June. We're going to have to see if it happens. Yeah, I think he's pretty locked in with the Dogs. I've talked to people who think it's going to take a lot to get him off that commitment. So that's an official visit that, might not even happen. And I mean, he didn't make a move in the rankings at all, but Jeremiah Smith, he's going to be at Penn State for the official visit on June 16th, the 5-star Ohio State wide receiver commit. He's the number 2 prospect in the nation. He's standing strong in that top 5. Really, really exciting prospect. Wherever he winds up, I think he's going to be a star.
A lot of opportunities out there for Penn State still with this recruiting class. Tyler Calvaruso had a great piece up over the weekend about what the forecast looks like in the crystal ball and where he's maybe close to putting some picks in, where he's a little more hesitant in terms of some of these top targets and where they are at in their commitment timelines. And with Penn State, we're going to learn a lot by this time next month. We'll be through a few of those official visit recruiting weekends. We'll have a pretty good feel for where the tea leaves are trending. And Daniel Gallen, we do know that Penn State has been busy during the month of April, adding to the roster. We weren't quite sure if Davian Collins, what the timing would be there. Well, we got an answer. He's on the roster. He's here. He's among those May enrollees, and very quickly making the move from Mississippi State. Again, did not play at all last year. Took a red shirt. Essentially throwing him into that as a member of your 2022 class. You lost Christian Driver from that cornerback room. So you're maybe addressing that a little bit. And as we said, think long-term here. Don't think about West Virginia matchup and what they're going to do at cornerback.
Definitely. I think that Collins is someone that, who knows how much we'll even get to see him this fall, depending on how this cornerback room shakes out. At this point, we all know what's in there. We all know who's at the top of the pecking order with Kalen King and Johnny Dixon, and guys like Cam Miller who are looking to make a move into some playing time. But yeah, I think that this is a good transfer pickup for them in terms of looking towards the future, forecasting things out. It looks like there's going to be a pretty impressive group of freshman cornerbacks that arrive in the class of 2024. But as we know, it can be hard to contribute right away as a freshman consistently. It seems like the guys who burn the red shirts outside of Kalen King, who is, I think, a rarity, but someone like Cam Miller with some spot duty and special teams. So I think to have someone who is a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, even though he didn't play last year, I think sets the room up nicely as you move forward. And then as these younger, true freshmen will arrive next year, just to have another kind of base layer of young talent that Terry Smith can develop. And we've seen Terry Smith do a really good job, developing some of these cornerbacks recently. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do with Collins, how exactly he fits into this backfield, given how they use different body types. But I'm excited to see him, and it's kind of another guy to have at the top of the list, when we finally get, to watch this team in August in practice.
Storm Duck came and went. He's now at Louisville. Spent some spring ball here at cornerback position, and he's really more the mold of what we've seen Penn State do in the transfer portal. Arnold Ebiketie, Derek Tangelo, in terms of effectiveness. But there have been examples of guys who have come in with maybe sophomore status. Jordan Stout was here for 3 years. Chop Robinson, you're getting multiple years out of him. We've made the Johnny Dixon, parallel a bunch and coming into the cornerback room as a younger player. So you're making a longer-term investment. You're not necessarily looking at the short-term answer with a pickup like Davion Collins, but that one gets to the finish line in a hurry. That means their transfer total for the month of May is him. It's Dante Cephas at wide receiver. You've got Addison Penn, the walk-on pickup, who spent the last few seasons at Duke. You've got Alonzo Ford at defensive tackle, and then you've got Trey Potts at running back. So we've talked a lot about the freshmen. We've had a few of them on, but look at the experience that this roster is adding here as we get ready for summer to arrive in Happy Valley. Basketball transfer portal as well. It's been very busy for Mike Rhodes' program, and Tyler Calvaruso, they dip into it again on Monday, picking up a commitment from former Miami big man Favor Ire. He was part of that March Madness run with the Miami Hurricanes last year. Of course, very limited role with the Hurricanes in 2022-2023, but he's relocating to State College and looking for a fresh start on a roster that features plenty of fresh starts at this point.
I think at this point in the cycle, this is the kind of chance that you take on a developmental big, especially in this day and age of college basketball, where you could be more willing to take a chance on a guy like Ira just based on where he's at in his development. Because, if it doesn't work out, you could always go back to the portal and address that the following year. And if it does work out, then you hit a home run and you added a really quality player to your roster. He played sparingly for Miami last season. He's always more of a guy that Miami wanted to develop in the background. He's looking for a little bit bigger of a role. That's why he wound up hitting the portal. And, I think that while he still does have a ways to go as a developmental guy, I think that he adds value to Penn State's 2023-24 roster right off the bat, just in the sense that he can back up Qudus Wahab and give the Nittany Lions potentially some good minutes. I think, this is a team that kind of lacked that quality depth in the front court at times last season. I think that, Aire might be able to address that as the 23-24 season goes on. And now you only got one scholarship left. So how do you use that scholarship? Do you go to the portal and do you look for another guy who could potentially make an impact right away this upcoming season? Do you use that last scholarship on a late flyer in the 2023 class, a guy that you can, really get to work with behind the scenes? You let him take a redshirt year. You see where you could get him at this time next year, potentially as a contributor. I think those are the conversations being had right now among the staff. But it looks like they're definitely going to use that last scholarship this year. That's not going to be one that they save for the future. So we'll be keeping an eye on names, potential visitors moving forward, but we're not done just yet with the Penn State basketball program on the recruiting front. Definitely not done.
Daniel, I've lost count a few times along the way, but I'm pretty sure that Penn State's at 8 transfer pickups in terms of the Mike Rhodes era and what they've done in a short span. What do you make of this pickup and how it addresses what they want to accomplish in the front court?
Yeah, I think it's a good pickup, especially losing Kebajai to Notre Dame, kind of replenishing that, young big that you can develop in the front court. One of our posters on the message boards actually pointed this out, where you look at the class of 2022 recruiting rankings. Kebajai, number 21 center, number 118 overall. Favor Ire, number 22 center overall, number 119 prospects overall in the class. So you're getting you're replacing someone who departed with a similar type recruiting prospect. Obviously, we're a year removed from that there, but I think that Ira is someone who can come in with Wahab there. Won't necessarily need to shoulder a load right away. We know how Mike Rhodes plays, and I think that the way this roster is constructed, that they can go small at various points with the length that they have. So I think that it'll be really interesting to see how this staff can develop bigs. I think that that's maybe a little bit of a kind of niche storyline, I guess. You have Demetrius Lilly, who's going into his sophomore year. We barely saw him last year. He can do some things that I really like. But Mike Rhodes brought in Brent Scott, who was with him at VCU and Rice. He's 6'10", played in the NBA for a minute, was a star at Rice. He is a big man himself. I'm very curious to see what the development looks like in the front court. And I think Ire will be a good test case for this. But, I think that he's someone who can spell Wahab when they need to. And I think that given what we saw last year, there were times where that lack of size really seemed to put Penn State in some tough spots. So I think that adding Ire means that you have playable size in the front court. It's never a bad thing because that changes the shape of the court a little bit. And I'm excited to see what he'll be able to do in his development.
Let's stick with basketball and finish with a mailbag. We had some fun on our last episode of the podcast with a football mailbag with Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan. We'll finish with these guys on a basketball note. And here's the question. Ace Baldwin is clearly the top guy, but which of Penn State's other transfer pickups projects as the next most important player for potential success next season? This question actually came our way before Ire committed. I don't think either of you were going to pick Ire for this answer, but let's begin with you, Tyler Calvaruso, and then Daniel can give his pick.
I don't know, man. I think we should let Daniel go first. I jumped him. I jumped the gun on him. So, Daniel, you know what, man? You go first on this one. I jumped you first one. So,
what a gentleman.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I think that Ace Baldwin, like this question says, that he's going to be the guy next year. We kind of know what he is as a known quantity. I think the first guy that kind of pops into my head when looking at this is Qudus Wahab. I mean, he's 6'11". He's played in the Big Ten before. It didn't go too well, but he's had a lot of experience. And I think that if he can give you, solid minutes, if he can, hit his averages from last year, pretty much, 9 and 7. If he can maybe bump that up, if you can get 10 and 8, 11 and 8 out of him in the post, I think that that's something that can really, really help this team. The second guy that popped into my head was that I think I'm excited about is Zach Hicks, the Temple transfer. We've seen that he can score. He kind of had a more of a reserve role with the Owls. And I think that if he has the opportunity to, compete and get into a bigger role, see those minutes increase, I think that he can be someone that can bring a scoring punch. He's got that length. I think that he can fit what Mike Rhodes wants to do really, really well. And I think that he could wind up being, one of the more, all these guys are new. So it's like one of the newer surprises, I guess, from this transfer class.
Calvaruso?
For me, it's I think it's Nick Kern Jr. I think that when you look at the way Mike Rhodes likes his teams to play defense, a lot of it is, applying ball pressure, getting into the passing lines and just passing lanes and just, creating havoc. That was the VCU motto for such a long time. And I think Kern Jr. could I think he could guard 2 through 4. I think if Rhodes wants to go to some small ball line, I think you could see Nick Kern at the 4 at times. Granted, it might not be for extended stretches, but I think that's something that he has in his skill set. I mean, he's not a good shooter right now. He's more of a slasher, and that's perfectly fine because he could get to the rim and he finishes strong around the rim for a guy who's a bit lankier, has a bit, more frail of a frame. I think that there's a lot to like about his game. I think there's still a lot of growth for him that he kind of really hasn't tapped into yet. I feel like he could be one of those really under the radar impact players throughout Big Ten play, just really interrupting the game and making things tough on opponents with his length defensively. I think that we talk a lot about what he could bring to the table offensively. I think defensively, when it's all said and done, I think that's going to be where he leaves his mark on this program. He's going to be able to do it with his versatility. So I like where he's at. I like him as my pick for this one.
Bunch of content at Lions 24/7 over the last couple of months about this roster build. Eventually, we'll start looking at how it all puts together on the court and what this Penn State team can achieve when they start getting into work again. But Daniel, Tyler, always appreciate it. It was good hanging out with you guys in person on Sunday. That's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. A lot to look at lions247.com right now coming out of Sunday's camp event. We still have interview. We still have video, photo galleries, a lot to dive into. Check out the Luke Reynolds highlights from Sunday to get a better feel for what we were just breaking down about the Penn State tight end commit. We'll be back with another episode later this week, but time to get back to work on the site. On behalf of Daniel and Tyler, I'm Tyler Donohue. This has been the Lions 24/7.